Hi, I am Jonathan Jones, and I'm going to be going over this article, Can Texting Help with Spelling? And as a future educator, I think this is something that was quite interesting to read. And when I was growing up and going to school, we were to think that, using our phones in class and all these things was a bad thing. And with that being said, I thought it was interesting to see that with all this article is that we were completely wrong. And as I began to read it, I noticed that I was doing some of these things as well, and how I never noticed that texting was just another way of writing. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then there was one other thing that caught my eye and attention was how kids used to pass notes back and forth in class. I thought that was pretty interesting as well because we all did that. So I know I did, and that was just another form of texting in a sense. So with that being said, since we already know that these kids are constantly on their phones, that we can use this against our advantage. And some schools have already prepared that, but I think this article really goes over the fact that it's okay to integrate that with it because it's not going to change anything. And if we force them to not do it, then they're not going to be encouraged to be in the lesson. So, going over some of the major facts, the things that stand out to me was that how often these kids text, and you can clearly see it by reading here along. And I'm not going to read the article itself. You can go ahead and look that up. But with that being said, it's just growing up back then, I never realized how much I texted until like I really noticed it. And we are just now like setting up systems on our phones where they're actually recording and seeing how many times we do this or do that. So it's really interesting to see, and it's even more so for girls apparently from what this article says. So there you go. But uh, one of the things that really caught my attention was that texting actually increases literacy as well. Because if you're going to be writing, you also have to be reading. So with that being said, I that threw me for a loop because I thought this was in the sense of like just spelling, but it's actually going further into depth because it makes sense if you're writing, you're going to have to be reading as well. So that was pretty interesting. And these new words that are coming out of nowhere, for instance, as phonology. I don't even think that was ever a word when I was back in school, and now it's actually part of something, and you're actually needing to do something about it. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. Mm, and of course, it goes over how it helps with literacy and spelling as well. And then it supposedly says that the students know when not to text and they know when to text properly. So, for instance, if they're going to be texting their mom, they're going to be changing the way that they write and compared to what they're writing with their friends. Or maybe with when they get older, if they're going to be texting like a person for an interview or something of that nature, they're going to completely change that. And reading on later, you actually notice that they actually want to start teaching that. That when you text different people, you need to see what you're texting. If it's a friend, then you can go ahead and just use casual slang, and all those different types of things that you best communicate in a fun, social way. And then there's different ways where your parents may not be as old, or they may be older, obviously, and they may not understand all these other things. So you're going to have to break it down or lengthen it out a little bit. And then there's finally the professional way. So there's three ways that they're starting to teach how to essentially text and write. And not only that, since you're writing, you're going to be reading, and then of course you're going to be speaking. So when you're talking to your mom, you're not going to be saying the same thing that you would with a friend. So they're teaching that as well, which is really interesting and pretty neat. And how yeah, texting is a fun way to play with words. I thought that little section was pretty fun because they even tell you to like try to pull a word together. And inventing new textism is creative. So trying to figure out a new word like for later, all you have to do is just put LAR. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. I never would have thought of that. So, um, and then of course it has its historical roots in that new words are actually starting to be developed. That was pretty interesting as well as I continue to read. Is that, for instance, I mean, you can obviously see it right here, OMG. Everybody knows what that is, and now it's being part of the Oxford English Dictionary. It's being added in. So that's just we're just waiting on LOL now, I guess. But that was pretty interesting as well. Um, and I think if we go further down here, and it's that it actually doesn't distract students, but reading this section, it kind of caught my eye because with that being said, I guess when you take the student's phone away, they're more distracted and worried about who's texting them or what's doing this. So their mind's really not focused on the activity. But if we don't worry about it and we kind of integrate that phoneology and textism and using their cell phones in the class, it will get them more involved in the activity and they'll grab more information out of it rather than just, all right, we're putting our phones in the front of the room and they're completely distracted because they're getting texts from their friends or maybe potentially their mom because they're waiting for something. So using that against our advantage is going to help as well. And then another one that really caught my eye was note taking, how to effectively write notes with their phone. So if they're going to use abbreviations, this is where the other paragraph comes into play. They can actually use their abbreviations to make better note taking. And after reading that, I noticed that I do that as well. Now, if someone else were to read my notes, I don't think they would understand it at all. So because there's some things that I do and there's some signs that represent for something. So instead of writing and, this is simple. Instead of writing and, I just do the and symbol. And for instance, another thing, if I have to write with, I'll just write W slash. So that's just something that I do, and I thought that was really neat that they're starting to teach that because when they move on and they're going to pursue a higher education, some of these professors are going to be speaking really quickly, as they mentioned, so they need to write something effectively that they can understand. So I thought that was actually really interesting as well. I keep saying that a lot. So, but it is. This article was very eye-opening for me, as I mean, I would never expected that a phone would actually be beneficial in a classroom nowadays. Because I know, like I said before, and back when I was in high school, when I had a phone, it was something is viewed as distracting and getting in the way and not being productive at all. But now times are changing. So we're using our cell phones to our advantage to benefit them. So this was really interesting to read. And then this last section right here I thought was really cool as well, is how they can use history to actually say what they would say if they had phones back then. So of course they use Abraham Lincoln. What would he have texted Mary before he gave his speech? Like, oh, I'm nervous, LOL, or something of that nature. And then of course with Romeo and Juliet, what would they be texting back and forth? So it gives a new perspective of what they're thinking, and it gets them to think deeper and more critically about what the subject they're talking about. So, but regardless, other than that, this article was very interesting, and hopefully I can actually integrate cell phones into my teaching once I have my own classroom. So, thank you, Dr. Fraga, for letting me read this. It was very eye-opening. See you next time.